Okay, let's react to something else. I still want to react to some music.
At the end of the day, the
music history. Like, I'm into music history lessons. I fucking love music, and shout out to the punk rock king NBA. He fucking made a fucking fucking made a fucking channel that talks about like the fucking people, the fucking bands that I love in a way that doesn't fucking like make me fucking read Wikipedia pages to know who the fuck are the people that I'm listening to. So yeah, let's check out the strange history of the Offspring. The Offspring, quite a fucking band. They still fucking release songs to this day, and it's still fucking like legit. It still sounds fucking awesome. Cannot believe that they're still rocking this out. Anyway, let's check it out. I fucking love this band. If you never fucking listened to the Offsprings, don't don't, because like at this point, you'll become a legend just because you were able to miss such a fucking good time. Alright, let's check it out.
Offspring, more than anybody else, were the band that really put that style on the map for millions and millions of kids back in 1994. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock NBA, and today we are here to talk about The Offspring, a band that really hasn't gotten the credit that they deserve for honestly being one of the most important bands in the entire history of punk. It's true. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you say before that Pretty Fly for a White Guy is one of the worst songs ever made? And yes, I did say that, I do believe that, but it is still true. The Offspring did a lot for the culture.
I used to sing Pretty Fly for a White Guy in my fucking band. We even did a concert singing that.
I kind of think about it this way. If Green Day were the band that put the Bay Area style of pop punk on the map, then the Offspring were that for the Southern California sound, which 30 years later has proven to be by far the more important and influential style. And if you asked most people, including the members of the band, back in 1992 or something, if this would ever happen, they would have told you that you were crazy. So the question is, how exactly did this happen? How did they go from being just really one of 1,000 fairly obscure Southern California punk bands to selling over 15 million albums? And more importantly, what is their lasting influence, legacy, and impact?
Okay, for this question, so someone that actually fucking studied all this stuff, and sadly I live in fucking no man's land, so industries are different when you are remote. But I'll tell you this, it's not the case for everyone, but they kept on going. This is one of the things that a lot of people do not understand about entertainers as big, is that these people, they got something and they kept on going no matter what. No, and it didn't work at first, and not at the second time, not at the third, not at the 10th, but they kept on going, and that's usually one of the reasons why they are still there. And usually you can see that because past their almost greatest all-time fame, right? Well, I was talking about it earlier. Well, the Offspring, they keep releasing songs. They keep fucking doing touring and stuff. So usually it's people that fucking love what they do and they fucking keep going. This is one of the things. There are many other things, but after studying this stuff, and I was like, how the fuck did they do it? You know, it's so stupid. And I was like, oh, you're right. They just keep trying, you know? They just keep trying. And yeah, I thought it was interesting to share, you know?
And also, why haven't they really gotten the credit that they deserve? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. And also, I want to thank One Rep for sponsoring this video. OneRep is a platform that removes people's private records from over 100 people search sites and Google, which is important because what you may not realize is that people search sites like White Pages, My Life, and so forth expose your home address, phone number, information from your legal and property records, and a lot of other really sensitive data. And scammers can use that to do all kinds of things like open credit cards and accounts in your name, file fraudulent tax returns on your behalf, and so forth. This happened to one of my business partners, and trust me, it is an absolutely awful, nightmarish experience. Those data brokers also sometimes publish inaccurate information. So, for example, someone does a background check on you and someone else's criminal record shows up associated with you. So if you want to help protect yourself against all that, you can do it with a subscription to OneRep. You'll strengthen your privacy and safety, dramatically reduce the risk of falling victim to identity theft and imposter scams, cut down on spam, and just get general peace of mind. Sign up with OneRep right now and get 60% off a 1-year plan with an exclusive offer for the viewers of my channel. Just go to the link in the description of this video. We are talking only $5.85 per month if you choose to protect yourself, and $11.95 a month if you sign up your whole family. And OneRep is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you even have a trial period to see if it's right for you. So in order to answer those questions, let me start at the beginning.
Let me just check one thing real fast. Okay.
Because the Offspring have actually been around for almost 40 years now, believe it or not. They started out way back in 1984 under the name Manic Subsidal. Not really sure what they were thinking with that one. Definitely not the world's best name. And they probably had the same thought because they changed their name in 1986 to the Offspring and put out their first album in 1989 on a label called Nemesis Records, which was really just like a small punk hardcore kind of label from Orange County that most people probably know for putting out bands like Chorus of Disapproval and Instead. Like I'm slipping away, I can't find that path alone. And although they don't really get a lot of credit for it now, the band...
You can already feel the vibe from the first records. You can already feel that they had a vibe that like they fucking lacked.
Was most definitely a part of the DIY punk scene of that era. Like if you look, there are some absolutely wild flyers
that they found a vibe that they fucking like. That's what I mean.
Back then, first shows they played with bands like Final Conflict and Infest, Agnostic Front, and Fugazi. My favorite one is Neurosis and Chumbawamba at Gilman Street, and the next day it's the Offspring. But the first time I remember seeing their name was around 1992 when they signed to Epitaph and put out their second album, Ignition. Epitaph was a much smaller label back then than it is now, but they still did a lot more to market their releases than just about any other punk label. So I remember seeing a lot of ads and reviews and stuff for this album in kind of the underground press sort of circuit. But still, it really didn't catch on beyond kind of their core fan base, so I think absolutely nobody was expecting what was about to happen. The band went from being essentially unknown outside of Southern California to being literally on top of the charts almost overnight in 1994 with the release of their third album, Smash, and specifically the song Come Out and Play, which went to #1 on Billboard, and I would say is still my favorite song by The Offspring. And they proved that they were more than a one-hit wonder by following that up with Self-Esteem, which went to #4 on Billboard, and then Gotta Get Away, which went to #6. 3 back-to-back top 10 singles on one album. They were officially a mainstream success at this point. And before I go on, I really want to dive deep and give some context on this album and exactly why it was so important, because I think maybe people kind of sort of know this, but I've never really heard anybody talk about it. First of all, in hindsight, obviously Green Day ended up being the biggest band of that like mid-90s punk explosion, but in 1994 or 95, that was definitely not clear. At that time, I would say it was kind of like a three-way tie between Green Day, The Offspring, and Rancid. And actually, of the three,
Actually, it's unbelievable that fucking Green Day and Offspring were like the same era. I would have believed that like the Offspring were like at least years before Green Day. That's actually such a strange thought.
Offspring had charted the highest by a good margin. And although, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't any sort of rivalry or anything like that between those bands, in a sense, it really was kind of a showdown between the two big styles of pop punk at the time.
Hey, Chill Mill, thank you for the follow.
On the one hand, you had Green Day and Rancid representing the Bay Area Lookout Records kind of style that was centered around the venue 924 Gilman Street, with bands like Crimp Shrine, 15, Cringer, and Jawbreaker. And on the other hand, the Offspring sort of unofficially representing the Southern California sound, with the notable bands being Bad Religion, NoFX, Pennywise, Lagwagon, and so forth. And you may be saying to yourself, oh, that's interesting. Like, why have I never heard of these bands Crimp Shrine and 15? And that is exactly my point. At the time, the Bay Area scene was considered to be more credible and closer to quote unquote real punk by the, punk establishment, whoever the people are that decide those sort of things at zines like Maximum Rock and Roll. But 30 years later, it's very clear that the Southern California style has really had more staying power and is a lot more relevant and popular. And obviously, Bad Religion played a big role there as well, but really, at the end of the day, the Offspring, more than anybody else, were the band that really put that style on the map for millions and millions of kids back in 1994. And aside from just the impact of the Offspring themselves, the success of this album really made it possible for a whole generation of bands to succeed by changing the trajectory of Epitaph Records forever. For anybody who may not be familiar, just as a quick refresher, Epitaph was started by Brett Gurewitz, the guitarist and founder of Bad Religion, originally just to put out their albums and then kind of grew into a label that was bigger than that. And although it was certainly successful for a punk label of the early 90s, it was hardly like a big operation. They sold something like 25,000 copies of the previous Offspring album, which by today's standards would be pretty good, but back in the early 90s when people still bought physical media, that was not a lot of records. And so neither the label or the band really expected much more than that from this album. I think this interview with Dexter from 1994 really kind of sums it up. The possibility of us getting played on the radio or anything like that was pretty much non-existent, especially because this kind of music is not generally considered acceptable by the mainstream. So for something like this to happen, it really took us by surprise. Because keep in mind, at this point, there's really no evidence that punk was viable in the mainstream because this was still before Green Day had blown up, and the Offspring were still essentially a part-time band. Like, Noodles still had his job as a janitor at a high school in Anaheim. But still, after kind of taking off locally and then getting picked up on the radio all over the country, it ended up being a gigantic success. It sold over 6 million albums, and as far as I know, still stands as the best-selling indie release of all time. And with the money Epitaph made from that album, it enabled them to take chances on a lot of smaller artists like the Voodoo Glow Skulls and Agnostic Front. They put out a Tom Waits record. All these artists who they believed in creatively or for being part of the scene, but clearly nobody thought they were going to sell millions of albums. But they could do that because of the money that they had coming in from Smash. It also helped independent record stores survive. I think Brett Gurewitz put it really well. He said that this album raised the sea level for the whole punk community. Even if you think that the Offspring were shitty poser stuff for kids who shop at the mall, this album was still the entry point for millions and millions of kids to eventually get into quote-unquote real punk. Like, how many kids heard Come Out and Play and then got into NoFX and Strung Out, and then maybe they checked out Crass and Black Flag or whatever? Or maybe they saw that the Offspring covered bands like The Digits, or later on they did a song with Jello Biafra. Personally, I can't really say that I'm a huge fan of their music, but I can definitely recognize what they did for the scene by helping so many people get into punk. With that said, as usual, the punk scene had to find a way to view somebody else's success as a negative. Of course, along with Green Day and
yeah, this is kind of like, this is the problem with so many, this is the problem with entertainment as a whole. Like, basically, like, wait, let me just listen.
They were added to the list of bands that real punks had to hate. And I remember the legendary 80s.
No. So, basically, like, this is the problem with, like, the entertainment industry. Like, people become successful, it becomes a problem to some people. I never understood, and you can check within any type of entertainment industry, like any type of entertainment industry, like someone becomes big, someone becomes successful, even without any like scrutiny or like any scandal, uh like following their fucking like rise to fame, and it becomes a fucking it becomes a fucking problem. It becomes a fucking like it became a fucking trend that I never fucking understood. Like people like started to fucking like dig through, like search through the people past or whatever, and like try to find the fucking problem. And it's just like at least like from my perspective, it's just like, if you really want to fucking be sure that you achieved a famous status, like you have to start having haters. If you don't have haters, it means that you're not famous enough, that you're just like you're still mainstream. Like this is such a trend that like I never understood. It is in every type of entertainment industry, this type of like this type of fucking like problem. uh, Really funny, and like sometimes like for good reasons, most of the times for like no reasons at all, just because haters gonna hate. And but I gotta respect that haters gonna hate, and they do fucking hate, like quite quite solemnly, you know.
Southern California punk band Agent Orange in particular got really upset because they felt like that one surf guitar kind of part from Come Out and Play was a little too similar to their song from 1981 called Bloodstains.
Yeah, like this is, I can't maybe, but like come on.
Which I personally thought was kind of stupid because, as the Vandals pointed out in their song about it called Aging Orange, that's really just the Phrygian scale. But could you really expect anything else from boomer punks? In any case, regardless of whether you like this album or not, the point that I am making here is that this album was a big, big deal for punk. Every bit as big as Dookie. Which brings us to their next album, Ixnay on the Hombre from 1997, which put them in the kind of difficult position of having to follow up on this giant mainstream success. Everyone was wondering, could they keep the momentum going, or was that one album really all they had in them? Were they just kind of in the right place at the right time? And as history will now show, they answered that question with this album, which was kind of complicated by the fact that they left Epitaph over disputes with Brett Gurewitz. They ended up signing to Columbia Records. But in spite of all that, the album went to number 9 on Billboard, and the single Gone Away was another mainstream hit. Maybe not quite as big as Come Out and Play or Low Self-Esteem, but still a big song, and the album did go platinum and showed that they had staying power and that they were more than just a punk band. Like, I would consider Gone Away to be more of what you would call like a rock song that got picked up by a lot of radio stations that maybe wouldn't typically play a punk band. And with their continued success, they brought even more people into the scene. Which brings us to their next album, Americana, in 1998, which was arguably the peak of their mainstream relevance. Smash may be the fan favorite, but I think if you look now, it's worth noting that 3 of their top 5 most streamed songs are from this album. Which personally, I kind of question why. This album is best known for the song Pretty Fly for a White Guy, which I understand is an ironic song, it's a self-parody, whatever, but
It's kind of like the Into Deep of the Offspring, to be honest. Like if you think about it, isn't that?
still, this is one of the most irritating songs of all time to me.
And all the girls say I'm pretty fly.
Oh, white guy.
Who really gives a shit what I think, right? Because regardless of my personal opinion, this song was a gigantic hit. It's super catchy. It was a huge song. It went to number 1 in I think like 9 or 10 countries. Most of them in Europe, which I think validates everything that I've ever said about Europeans and their terrible taste in music. This album was also the first time where I'd say that they really changed up their style a bit. Up until this point, they'd really continued to play pretty straightforward Southern California style pop pop punk that, other than better production, really didn't sound all that different from their first album. But with this one, they went, I guess you would say, a little bit more pop, added in some sort of other elements like different kinds of percussion and stuff. Personally, I think this album is a little bit more corny and cartoonish than their earlier stuff, but I can also recognize why it's their most accessible. For example, like the horns and percussion in Why Don't You Get a Job? They also got a pre-fame Zooey Deschanel in the video for
I always felt that like Get a Job, it was a fucking like Christmas song. I could never listen to the song just because of how Christmassy it sounds. Like, I fucking hated that.
She's Got Issues, dressed like she is Ramona Flowers. Very, very 90s look. They also started to do more kind of larger pop culture stuff, which I get the sense that they also 90s look for She's Got Issues, dressed like she is Ramona Flowers. Very, very 90s look. They also started to do more kind of larger pop culture stuff, which I get the sense that they kind of sort of resisted a little bit before. Like, if you notice, they never did the whole late night talk show circuit that a lot of bands did, which I'm sure they had lots of offers for. For example, they were on the soundtrack to the game Crazy Taxi, which I remember playing a ton on Dreamcast until I just got absolutely sick of their song, but it was a great
That's some cool stuff.
game. They also had a cameo in the movie Idle Hands, the kind of horror comedy movie with Seth Green and Jessica Alba, where Dexter gets his scalp ripped off by a disembodied hand while wearing an AFI shirt. And speaking of AFI, this is also when Nitro Records really came into its prime, which is a label founded by Dexter and Greg from The Offspring in 1994, and had bands like Rufio, Guttermouth, and Jughead's Revenge, and most notably also put out everything from AFI up to and including the All Hallows EP. Basically all of the punk era AFI releases. And for sure, AFI was going to be big regardless of what label they were on, because they're just that good and the guys in the band are that smart. But
FI is really like something as well, yeah.
at the same time, the fact that Nitro was able to use the Offspring's platform to give them a little bit of a boost had to help, right? For example, him wearing their shirt in Idle Hands, or the Offspring covering AFI on the soundtrack for the Jim Carrey movie Me, Myself, and Irene.
This rage I cannot let go.
And of course,
Like, what the fuck is this song?
Irene, covering AFI on the soundtrack for the Jim Carrey movie Me, Myself, and Irene.
Alright. Okay, this is a song that I want to listen to. Okay.
I cannot let go.
And of course, as most of you know, AFI went on to be one of the most important bands of the 2000s, and themselves did a ton to help the punk and hardcore scene. So again, I think you have to kind of give the Offspring some of the credit there for facilitating that to some extent. Nitro also put out a ton of classic punk bands like TSOL, The Damned, and The Vandals. And if you look at what the label has put out, it seems pretty clear to me that their goal was never really to like make a ton of money. It was really just to put out what they thought were great bands. And the money they made and the platform that they had with the Offspring really was just a way to help facilitate that. Nitro doesn't really get a ton of credit for it, I don't think, but honestly, they were one of the best labels of the 90s. Which brings us to what I would call the end of the Offspring's most relevant era, with Conspiracy of One from 2000. This one doesn't seem to be very popular with the fandom, but if I personally had to choose one Offspring album to listen to, I think it would be this one. Because to me, it's the one that sounds the most like a typical 90s Fat Records Repitaph band. Like some band you would see play with Good Riddance and Pulley or something. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or just kind of worked out this way, but it seemed like they dropped most of the like goofy, cartoonish kind of stuff from Americana, with the exception of the song Original Prankster, which I think of as kind of like Pretty Fly Part 2. It's honestly a really good album.
Until the break of time, life cannot go by.
Yeah, Original Prankster, like, they have just this vibe that's just like this happy and like like really chilly vibe, you know, that in certain songs, but also like such depths to it. They went actually way darker after that, but like I really like this song.
Time, Prozac can make it better.
And although the band never went away and of course continued to do well, they put out several more albums, including one that actually just came out last year that I didn't even know about until I made this video. I think after this album, they were clearly past their prime, both commercially and in terms of their relevance. So I'm just kind of gonna lump all that together. And by the way, that is not a criticism. Like, it happens to literally everyone because nobody can stay at the top forever, right? So that brings us to the last question. What is their lasting impact, influence, and legacy? Well, on the one hand, I don't really hear a lot of people mention the Offspring as a direct musical influence like you do Green Day. Like, I don't hear a lot of people say, oh, the Offspring, that's the band that inspired us to start playing music.
I think that like the Offspring is more of a vibe, you know, like they didn't last because like when it comes to messaging and stuff like that, because like a lot of like bands, like let's say Green Day, because they talked about Green Day, left like a political message and such in such ways that like are interesting, but also like in certain way dividing people. When it comes to the Offsprings, they fucking did what I think is, and what I think is really like unbelievable is that like they fucking just did music and they still just do fucking music. And while they have like there is a lot to them, and there is a lot there is a lot to say about them. Like, what's unbelievable is just that, like, they had no big issues, they had no fucking big huge scandals. They just like did their thing, and fucking like bother no one, and they did it fucking loving it. So you can see that like they fucking love what they do. And I think that like this is like something really special that like not a lot of people, not a lot of fucking bands like can fucking say that they did, you know. And I don't know, yeah.
Music, but on the other hand, with tens of millions of albums sold, like, I'm sure there are plenty of people who would say exactly that. But to me, their influence is more about what Brett from Epitaph said, that they raised the sea level for punk as a whole, along with Green Day and Rancid. Like I said, in particular for that Southern California.
I think that like they made this punk rock type of like genre accessible to many people, where like when you think about punk rock, you think about like political messaging, like being against a society or some stuff, and some people are just into like cool musicians, like talking about like, I don't know, fucking like about themselves, about like life, you know, like and is right, like they allowed a lot of people to actually enjoy like music genre that was really inaccessible because of how fucking like edgy it was, and how like just like inaccessible it was just because of political messaging, of how political it was, while the Offspring just rode the wave and just fucking like allowed people to just enjoy what music for what it is, music, and just like without any of this like fucking butter that is a pick a side, and like fucking you're not like us, or like you're a fucking you're a fucking like show off, or this type of like childish nonsense that actually like a lot of people like fall into, and why a lot of people don't fucking like get into this type of like styles of bands, you know.
Style, which in hindsight ended up being by far the most important and influential version of punk, at least in the mainstream sense. I think their success also paved the way for that late 90s and early 2000s pop punk explosion, the what I call TRL bands like Newfound Glory, Blink-182, and Sum 41. And I say that because if you actually take a step back, I think that both sonically and culturally, they were a lot closer to those bands than Green Day were, who really seemed like they wanted nothing to do with any of that. Like, they almost thought they were too good for it. And personally, although I don't really love their music, I've always appreciated that they seem like really humble, chill real smart guys. For example, Dexter going back to school to finish his PhD in molecular biology in 2017, which obviously he didn't need to do. He's already rich and famous. It's not like he's going to go work in the field. It's just that he seems to really love the subject and love education, and he wanted to pursue that, which I think is pretty cool. And really, in hindsight, maybe more than any of those other 90s bands, they really never walked away from punk as a sound or a culture. And think of how many millions of kids got into punk because of them. So next time you think of bands that made a real contribution to punk, make sure that you have the Offspring on that list. Alright my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments of this video. Also,
This was a great video. Alright. Yeah, listen to the Offsprings if you didn't. Like, it's good time.